First, let me thank the Marx Forum, number one. But more, I would like to actually place my appreciation, actually, and my debt, my gratitude to Dattaji's presentation, actually. I would really put this down as really one of the best presentations I have heard on Marx in my entire life. Um, and this again shows why the best of Marx doesn't necessarily happen within the university or the academia. It happens outside. Marx himself happened outside the university, and the best of Marx or Marxian thought, Marxian praxis happens outside. So Dattaji really, it was absolutely moving for me.
Thank
You
you.
are much older than me. I don't have to praise you, but it's my gratitude to you. Literally, actually, it was really beautiful the way you put it. I will only build on what you have done already. I'm half inclined to have just a conversation with you in this presentation, but since I'm supposed to do at least what I put up in the abstract, but it's just a continuation of what you have already done. Actually, uh, you have encouraged me to go a little, intensely at what we can do today. Let me let me start with the PPT would have given you a picture, but that's fine. We can do it without that as well. Let me start with this imaginary whiteboard, maybe. That when we put Marx, when we write Marx, we tend to put the political adjacent to Marx. So Marx and political. Now let us see what happens with that. Um, Second, when we put Marxism, we have to think what we will put beside it. Political or XYZ, something else. Three, we usually tend to put religion and spirituality side by side as siblings. And usually religion looks to be the bigger brother or the male sibling, and spirituality looks to be smaller traditions, multiple, moving in different directions, some music there, um, all of that. Um, and we have religion and spirituality usually put side by side. So religion and spirituality tend to be seen as siblings. The major point in that book, Serap, Anjanda, and I were trying to make is the question we were trying to ask: is religion and spirituality, very very amicable siblings? Are they siblings? Four, we usually tend to see philosophy and spirituality as quite separated, and religion and spirituality as quite opposite. I will actually try to make religion and spirituality quite separate today, um, and make philosophy and spirituality quite close. How we will come to that? We'll have to make a few moves. It's like a chessboard, actually. Some moves have to be made through Marx. And actually, a part of it has been already done by Dattaji. I'm just trying to reach that point. So, what is the relationship between philosophy and spirituality? Last, we also tend to separate spirituality and the political. Spirituality we usually tend to put on the side of religion. I'm having to do all these hand movements because it was put in this form in the PPT, actually. Spirituality is usually put on the side of religion, and political looks to be a little away from spirituality. Is there a connection between spirituality and the political? And is that the secret connection between Marx as the political and the spiritual as the political? So, our usual tendency is to put religion, spirituality together, and Marx and political together on the other side. Is religion away from the spiritual, and Marx political spiritual, can it be come together? And that could be the new liberation theology, and that could be the ground for those kinds of processes we can put in place. This opens up for me. Already Dattaji has shared it, but we will have to look at it again and again. I feel is that introduction to a contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right. Um, Actually, sometimes seeing this quote is also important. Let's read it once again, though Dattaji has already read it out. Religious distress is at the same time the expression of real distress and also the protest against real distress. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, just as it is the spirit of spiritless conditions. Up to now, Marx is talking about religion, and it looks like Marx is saying something non negative about religion. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, the spirit of spiritless conditions, including it is a protest against real distress. And then comes another line, a line oft quoted: it is the opium of the people. Now, this line we have put up again and again. Religion is the opium of the people. But just before that line, there are 7 lines actually where Marx talks of religion in a very, very different way. Now, there is a question, a research question actually. Why did Marx then use the same word religion for sigh of the oppressed and opium of the people? Was Marx already sensing either two faces of religion? And this is akin to our school essay we had to write. Is science boon or bane? Orunda কি লিখতাম আমরা? Is science like good for humanity, or is science not good for humanity? So something like that we would write in our school days. Similarly, is there in Marx two faces of religion? One the opium of the people, the other protest against real distress. Or did Marx at that time, in mid 19th century, did not have the vocabulary to distinguish between religion and spirituality? Is he wanting to say it is spirituality which is a protest against real distress? And in the Indian tradition, at least in the Southeast Asian tradition, we have seen spirituality. We have seen the Sahajiya Bhakti tradition over here protesting against two kinds of real distress. One, the distress of religious orthodoxy, and two, the distress of a caste divided society imbued with untouchability. They denied two divides: Hindu Muslim and Dalit and Brahmin. So, in that sense, uh, is there in this quotation of Marx one part which talks of spirituality, and the other part, which is the last line, religion as the opium of the people, which talks of religion? Was Marx actually, without using the vocabulary that we have today, and there is nothing wrong in this actually, all thinkers, all political activists are limited by the tools of the time. Whatever conceptual tools they have at that time, they build on that. And based on that, they make their premise. So Marx was also building on the conceptual tools he had. He was perhaps not still having that vocabulary very, 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 very sharply that this is spirituality, this is religion. And this is the first distinction I have made. Religion and spirituality in Marx are not together as it is today. They are together. Spirituality looks to be, and I'm using a strong term over here, the defanged sister of religion. Something that has been devitalized, something that has been rendered, I would dare to call it pop spirituality. Something that has been rendered, oh, a little bit about life, little bit about chanting, little bit about soft meditation. No. For Marx, spirituality is a protest against real distress. Spirituality is the sigh of the oppressed. In that sense, what we see today as modern spirituality, as the defanged, devitalized sister of religion, is not what spirituality is in Marx, perhaps. Hence, we need to perhaps mark a sharp distinction between religion and spirituality. Put Marx on the side of spirituality and not on the side of religion. What, however, has been the problem of the history of Marxism? Is it spiritual deficit that has haunted Marxism up to now? Is it spiritual deficit that has made Marxism and Marxian statecraft violent, intolerant, and insensitive? Not just towards fellow human beings, but to the planet as well. So, in that sense, is spiritual deficit Marxism's problem, not Marx's problem? Let me come to the next point, which is my next slide also. Let us spend a few minutes rereading Marx's thesis on Feuerbach. The 11th thesis on Feuerbach, made famous for one of the theses. Philosophers have hitherto interpreted the world. The point, however, is to transform it or change it, and that is important. But there are a few more important things in that 11th thesis. The first important point in that 11th thesis is that Marx begins thesis on Feuerbach with the question of not the chief defect of all hitherto existing idealism. No. Marx begins the thesis with discussion on the chief defect of all hitherto existing materialism. Thesis on Feuerbach is talking of the defect of materialism, not the defect of idealism. What then is the defect of materialism? And Marx says, the defect is that reality is conceived only in the form of either an object or of intuition, but not as human sensuous activity, practice. And this is critical. This is important because Marx over here marks a defect of materialism, not of idealism. That the defect of materialism is that we are seeing materialism as objectified mechanical materialism, not processual materialism, materialism of practice, the materialism of the potter making the pot. The pot is not materialism. The pot-centered materialism is capitalist materialism of commodities. What Marx is talking of is the materialism of the potter making the pot, the materialism of creative pottery, the subaltern materialism of laboring and creation. Marx is not talking of object materialism, he is speaking of process materialism. Defect 3, I'm skipping 2. In the essence of Christianity, Feuerbach's book, practice is conceived and fixed only in its dirty Jewish manifestation. That's a strange line from Marx. Practice is conceived only in its dirty Jewish manifestation. We have managed to think practice in Feuerbach only in its dirty Jewish manifestation. Why is practice Jewish? Number one. Number two, why is practice dirty? And why is practice dirty Jewish? Let us not forget, Feuerbach is writing a book called The Essence of Christianity. And Marx, the Jewish philosopher, is critiquing Feuerbach for seeing practice in that book as a dirty Jewish manifestation. Marx makes an interesting discussion over here, marking a distinction between the Christian discourse on creation and the Jewish discourse on creation. Dirty Jewish, this is an allusion to the Jewish God of the Old Testament who had to get his hands dirty like a potter while making the world. And it is in symbolic contrast to the Christian God who creates through the word. In other words, Marx is marking a distinction between what Dattaji has already problematized as the abstract, the Christian God of the word and the Jewish God of the deed, symbolizing practical life. This distinction of the deed, of activity, kora, karna, kuch karna, shram, labor, laboring, this activity, this practical activity, this activity of creation as against thinking the world, as against creating through the word, through thought, is what Marx marks as the chief defect in Feuerbach and his essence of Christianity, and his representation of practice as dirty. And Marx says it is in practice indeed that we will find out the truth, the distinction between a snake and a rope. The dispute over the reality or unreality of the world and on thinking is a practical question, and it is in practice indeed that man must prove the truth. He wrote man, again limited by his time when he wrote man. Uh, that we would say woman today, not man. But what he does over here is that he marks first a chief defect of materialism. It's not objectual materialism, it's practical, practice-based, processual materialism, the materialism of pottery rather than the materialism of the pot. Number two, he also opens up the question that truth can only be found in practice, not simply by speculation or the way philosophy originally did it. This actually opens up for me one fundamental move Marx makes in philosophy. Marx is not just a critique of political economy. Marx is also a critique of philosophy. Marx moves philosophy to practical philosophy. Marx moves philosophy from a way of knowing the world, from an epistemological question, is it a snake or a rope, to a practical question, how do we do pottery? So in that sense, Marx doesn't just write a critique of political economy, he writes a critique of philosophy as well, and moves philosophy from standard classical philosophy, which is largely Cartesian philosophy, from standard classical philosophy, modern philosophy, to practical philosophy. And practical philosophy is a much older tradition, actually. Practical philosophy is there in Greek, practical philosophy is there in India, practical philosophy is there in the other continents, well before modern philosophical obsession with epistemology became the standard way of doing philosophy. So Marx breaks philosophy and moves us from labor studies to laboring. This is a fundamental distinction Marx marks in philosophy. We are not studying labor, we are laboring. The next point, and I have put it up already, now that we have separated, we have made two moves now. Move one, we have separated religion and spirituality. One. A. B, we have moved philosophy to practical philosophy. We have moved objectual philosophy to process philosophy. We have moved from the pot to the potter and to pottery, not just potter. We have not just moved from labor studies to laborer, but to laboring. We have moved from the potter to pottery, the process of pottery, the art of pottery, the craft of pottery, the act of pottery, the creative act of pottery. C. We have always kept philosophy and spirituality hyper separated. We have done philosophy in departments, in the universities, and spirituality has happened in some art of living space. Nothing wrong in it, but can we bring philosophy and spirituality together, and by the same move bring practical philosophy and spirituality together? For this, I will have to, of course, build on Marx, but move to a very different philosopher who was with us a few decades back. I go to a very, very late work of Michel Foucault. And in this late work, Hermeneutics of the Subject, Foucault marks a distinction between philosophy and spirituality. What is the distinction? I'll read it out. It would have been helpful had you seen it, but let's read it out. Foucault calls philosophy the form of thought that asks what determines truth and falsehood, how we can separate the true from the false, including how do we get access to the truth. So, philosophy is what is obsessed with true and false, with whether what we are seeing is a snake or a rope. What is spirituality then? Spirituality is the search and the practice through which the subject carries out the necessary transformations on herself in order to have access to the truth. Let us spend 2 minutes on this. This requires a little elaboration. One formulation in today's world is that I remain completely untransformed and I get to know the world. Which, Abhijit, is medicine. The doctor can write, please stop smoking on a prescription while smoking. Spirituality is very different from that. For one to be spiritual, to reach truth, one had to be self-transformed. One had to pay a price to reach truth. One had to pay the price of self-transformation to reach truth. The truth of labor will only be found in laboring, not in labor studies. Philosophical labor studies and Marxian labor studies, spiritualized labor studies, is different. It is only in the act of laboring that you get to experience the alienation and the exploitation labor undergoes. So, in that sense, Marx marks a very important distinction over here, which has been kind of lost to academic Marxism. That the distinction between philosophy as what is true, what is untrue, what is false, what is not false, and spirituality, which says that you can only know this world, or you can only know the truth of yourself through a process of self transformation. Marxism has not faltered on social transformation. It has faltered on connecting self transformation and social transformation. Hence, as Marxists, we have been extremely violent. We have never managed to work on our inner fascism. We have always managed to condemn fascism in Germany. So, this distinction actually brings philosophy and spirituality closer. And Foucault argues, I'm reading out just one line from here. It is in Marxism that old question of spirituality, he calls it Greek spirituality, I'll call it Sahajiya, and Sahajiya is not only in Bengal, um, and that tradition that was already there was revived in Marxism. Actually, the spiritual tradition was revived in Marxism. The typically spiritual question was brought back by Marxism in modernity, that I have to pay a price to reach truth. I have to go through a self transformation to reach truth. And that was brought back by Marxism, by Marx, only to be given up by Marxism. And that has been the history of Marxism. That old spiritual question that was inaugurated in modernity by Marx was given up thereafter in Marxism. And this takes me to one self-doubt, actually. While Marx can be brought closer to the political and the spiritual, given that now spiritual and political are closer, did Marxism become more religious than spiritual and political? The last point on the philosophy spirituality question. Philosophy is a way of knowing. Philosophical spirituality or spiritualized philosophy or practical philosophy is a way of life counter to all forms of inner fascism. Can such ways of living Marxism, living like a Marxist, being Marxist, becoming Marxist, open up a space for spiritualized Marxism? This is a question that we can take up. I'll come to my last section. I have about 15 minutes, not much time. The last part now. And this part I present with a little bit of self-doubt. But these are parts we have gathered over the years. And I'll go through these parts and then come to a reflection. Part one. Marx writes in Capital, Volume 1, in the section on fetishism, and Dattaji also brought up the question of fetishism. For a society of community, For a society of commodity producers, I hope someday they become community producers, not individualized commodity producers. That was an interesting slip. For a society of commodity producers, whose general social relation of production consists in the fact that they treat their products as commodities, hence as values, and in this material form bring their individual private labors into relation with each other as homogeneous human labor. Christianity, with its religious cult of man in the abstract, as Dattaji pointed out, Christianity, with its religious cult of man in the abstract, most particularly in its bourgeois development or modern development, is the most fitting form of religion. That's a strange line. Fitting form of religion for who? For a society of commodity producers. What is Marx hinting at over here? For a society of commodity producers means for a society marked by capitalism, which one is the most fitting form of religion? Christianity? Is Marx then marking a connection between capitalism and Christianity and capitalism and religion? And now I'm setting up the angle. We have hitherto seen religion with spirituality. But is Marx painstakingly, but in a scattered form, not managing to bring it all together in his lifetime, and he had a really short life? Is he actually putting capitalism on the side of religion and Marxism and the political on the side of spirituality? Christianity, and Marx goes on, Christianity, with its religious cult of man in the abstract, is the most fitting form of religion for a society of commodity producers. And this opens up a dangerous and a disturbing and a troubling angle in the history of reading Marx. Is capital also a critique of Christian theology, not just a critique of political economy? Let us go one step further. Points that have already been hinted at by Dattaji, and that's why I was really moved by his presentation. In Capital Volume 3, in a footnote, page 727 in my volume, Marx writes, the monetary system is essentially Catholic, the credit system Protestant. The monetary system is essentially Catholic, the credit system Protestant. The credit system, however, is no more emancipated from the monetary system, exactly the way Protestantism is from the foundations of Catholicism. Just like Protestantism and Catholicism cannot be separated, credit system and the monetary system cannot be separated. But the monetary system is essentially Catholic, the credit system Protestant. Does he mean to say that modern forms of capitalization of life are based on an earlier economic system already prevalent in Christianity? Or does he mean to say something more troubling? Capitalism as an economic form is the secularized modern form of Christianity. Does he also wish to suggest a point hinted at by Dattaji already when he spoke of Buddhism, that the modern economic form, capitalism, had it been born from some other context, say Buddhism, say Islam, or say more non-monotheistic contexts, or maternal polytheisms as in India or South Asia, or community ethics rooted in or reflected in their insistence on social use value, commodity values, community values. Would the economic form been different and not capitalism? Last doubt over here. Late Marx after 1867, 1867 to 1883, that phase in Marx's life, Marx had moved out of what Lenin called the three sources and component parts of Marxism: British political economy, German philosophy, French political theory, etc., to non-Europe. Marx had generated a massive archive, and I'm indebted to Pradeep Bokshi for showing me this path. I'm indebted to Professor Parthu Chatterjee actually for showing me this path, Professor Ranjan Ghosh for showing me this path. Late Marx moving away from Europe to Africa, Algeria, to Latin America, to India, to Russia, to the Russian commune. Moving and looking at non-European society. I have called this Marx the Asian Marx along with Anjanda. This is the Asian Marx actually who opens up a very new archive. This Marx, and Anjanda and I wrote a short paper in Bengali in Sir's Shonal, Sir's book on Marx, Banglaয় Marx. Banglaয় Marx, Marx in Bengali has a double meaning. Marx in Bengali and Marx in Bengal. Marx writing about Bengal. Marx writing about a village in Bengal, in South Bengal, possibly Midnapur. These open up for Marx processes other than the Christian Europe. Marx is studying other economic forms and non-Christian forms in these later works. And he's massively studying India in his later works. Last, on the Jewish question, Marx argues, and again this is a strange line, the bourgeois state is the full dialectical realization of the Christian state. The secular state is not a negation of the Christian state, but its full realization. Marx and Engels put it together. The politically perfected modern state that knows no religious privileges is also the fully developed Christian state. There is again and again in Marx a suggestion that as if something religious is continuing into what we are calling the secular modern. Something Christian is continuing over here. Last, Marx wrote, as part of his collaboration, a now lost manuscript called A Treatise on Christian Art. In this treatise, which I haven't read because it's lost to us now, Marx purportedly developed the idea of fetish and fetishism from his studies on religion. Marx was studying not just political economy, Marx was studying religion as intensely as he was studying political economy while he was writing Capital. Did he see in capitalism the transformation of the religious or Christian idea of the fetish, standing for both attribution of powers to an object over and above the mere material form? What is a fetish? It is to give powers over and above what a material object has, and and give a kind of surplus power to what the material ordinarily has. Did the idea of the fetish hence recur in Capital beyond the section on commodity fetishism? And Dattaji again, I, I, I owe it to him. He has raised the question of the fetish. The idea of the fetish looks to have offered two significant angles to Marx. One, it helped Marx show how commodity money and capital was being imputed with a power that was far, far exaggerated over the one it had in a material sense. The fetish relation operates in terms of that MM dash circuit, which Marx describes as the, I quote Marx, as the original starting point of capital. In the MM dash formula, capital apparently produces surplus value in and of itself, unassisted by the processes of production and circulation. In interest bearing capital, and I'm quoting Marx here, in interest bearing capital, therefore, this automatic fetish, this self expanding value, money generating money, is brought out in its pure state, and in this form, it no longer bears the birthmarks of its origin. In this pure, essential fetish form, capital embodies the whole process of production within itself, a mysterious, self creating, self generating source of its own increase. It may have various manifestations or even incarnations. See the religious language, incarnations, perhaps like original sin. As commodity, money, value, productive labor, capitalist, landlord, profit, and so on, each of them with properties acquired, but now regarded as inherent, but at its heart, capital is a fetish. Capital thus becomes the secular modern fetish. Capital as fetish is a topsy-turvy world. It is mystification in its most flagrant form. I end with a few self-doubts. One, Marx has been put on the side of the political, and we want to hold on to that. Marxism, can we put it on the side of the political, or has it tilted at times on the side of the religious? Self-doubt 2. 3, religious and spiritual have hitherto been kept intertwined like a Siamese twin. We have tried to separate the two. After having separated the two, we have brought philosophy and spirituality closer and have seen practical philosophy, rethought philosophy, philosophy as process, philosophy as practice, philosophy as a way of life, as closer to the spiritual praxis. Spirituality as a protest against real distress, spirituality as the sigh of the oppressed, moves from practical philosophy to political philosophy. We put Marx, political philosophy, practical philosophy, spirituality closer. Religion is now lonely on the other side. Marx offers us a few clues, and Dattaji presented it. Zizek Dattaji doesn't do the painstaking labor of reading these through and through to mark those connections, and he comes to, I would say, I know it's getting recorded, but sometimes a little bit of a quick generalization. Marx actually leaves us with with disturbing, dangerous suggestions. That's all. I'm not making more out of this, please. I'm only presenting it as a self doubt over here that is there something that capitalism perfects that Christianity had only perfected in a limited way? Fetishism is one example. Dataji also ended with fetishism. That is actually one area we really need to explore as a research collective. The concept of fetishism in Marx and how Marx actually got the concept from religious fetishism. Is there something continuous, something that gets more clarity in capitalism, actually? The idea of fetishism, the relation between the monetary system and the credit system in Catholicism and Protestantism. Does it get more clarity in capitalism? And is the MM-circuit a fetishistic expression of the logic of capital, where capital is as if self-expanding, as if it becomes something more than itself on its own, as if it becomes on its own, not so. In that sense, religion and capitalism actually looks on one side. So does Marx then have a dual critique? A dual critique of capitalism and Christianity, and the Christianization of modern life through secular theologies, secular warheads. So in that sense, religion and capitalism, Marx comes from a dual critique, and Dattaji was already hinting at it, that capital is not just a critique of political economy, it is also a critique of secular theology. And hence the intense use of Christian religious metaphors in Capital Volume 1, 2, 3. I actually am beginning to feel the idea of the fetish was a little nascent in Capital Volume 1. By Volume 3, Marx had as if worked out the idea of the fetish, and that fetish angle comes up in detail in Volume 3. So in that sense, as if Marx working through and is perfecting the idea of the fetish by Volume 3, actually. And we all know he planned 6 volumes. He could only complete 3 plus 1. He could not complete all. So is Marx then a dual critique of religion and capitalism? And is Marx then standing on a tripod? Practical philosophy, spirituality, this worldly spirituality, as Tataji has already pointed out, and spiritualized politics as not critique, as not a knowledge of the world only, politics as self-transformation, politics as also self-critique. Practical philosophy, politicized spirituality or this worldly spirituality, and spiritualized politics. Standing on all these three, do we need today a dual critique of capitalism and religion, both? Let it end here today. Thank you.